This video is a reaction to Short Hop's video entitled School Teaches You One Lesson and It's a Lie. Link is in the description. I'm not doing any editing or anything like that with fancy microphone, whatever. I'm not much of a YouTuber. But I have been a teacher for 13 years. I've taught in 3 different countries. I've taught every grade level from pre-K to the professors of postdoctoral students. And although I mostly teach English ESL, I've taught other subjects too. I've even been called in to teach my district's curriculum department. So my point in all this is to say that school as an institution thinks that I'm a good teacher and that I'm even qualified to be teaching not only other teachers, but the ones who like make the materials for all the other teachers. So my thesis here is that all the people among the institution of school are worth defending. The teachers, the principals, other faculty, school boards, and departments of education. And that school teaches much more than you think. Formal education is just about always worth it. Even university is worth it more often than you think. And the problems with school is not really from anyone that you would consider to be part of the institution of school. So I'm going to start off with where you said, quote, "There's no voluntarism. Your preferences in both what you study and who you study with do not matter at all." And then finally, they also teach that the unknown is not something you can manage by yourself. You cannot discover things by yourself. You cannot learn by yourself using some other method. You and I are in complete agreement. There should be voluntarism. A student's preferences in what they study and who they study with should matter. The unknown is something students should be able to manage by themselves, and students should be able to discover things by themselves. They should be able to accomplish tasks using alternative methods and a variety of methods. So now that we have that shared basis, I'm going to start with the question, why is school? Um, why do we have it? The short answer is that school is how we prepare children for participation in adult society. The problem is that various adults have different ideas about what adult society and participation in it is supposed to look like. Uh-oh, everything is politics. The most common ideas are that school is to prepare kids for university, which sounds like you aren't a big fan of. Another is that school is to prepare kids for the workforce. So I'm going to take an aside here. Um, I found on your Facebook page, which is like linked in all your other socials, that you are in Saskatchewan. So I'm going to assume that's where you went to school. Now, I did a lot of research on education in Saskatchewan to kind of understand the context here. And I found that back in the early 1900s, all students were made to be prepared for the Saskatchewan workforce, which was farming. So, like in 1905, every student had to graduate in agriculture. Now, over time, they added more and more vocational jobs. There was manufacturing and other stuff like that. But by the 1970s, they finally said, there are too many jobs. We can't have classes for all these things. And so they began to switch the curriculum. Um, but even when you believe that school is to prepare children for work, adults can disagree about how. Is it to train kids for the highest paying jobs? Is it to train kids for their personal career choice? Uh, but even then, like, is that good? Like, is it really good for a kid to choose their whole life trajectory at age 14? Um, or is it to train kids in the jobs that, regardless of income or personal fulfillment, are just most strategically advantageous to the state? Beyond work and college, school can be for preparing kids to be well-rounded or to explore their personal interests aside from work. And different adults have had all of these different opinions. So ultimately, the why of school is going in any specific place is going to be an average of the opinions of all the adults that go into it, not just the people in the school institution, but also like the millions of parents, local politicians, province politicians, national politicians, etc. So let's talk curriculum about what gets learned in school. All the way back in 1916, we have John Dewey, the philosophical godfather of education. He wrote a book called Democracy in Education. Um, he was the person who really made global education turn away from rote memorization and everything that you think about with like a tiny little schoolhouse in the 1800s. Um, and he turned education toward what was called progressivism even back then. So if you ever did anything at all in school that wasn't a silent worksheet about memorizing a Greek or Roman text, you have John Dewey to thank for that. Okay, like group activities, projects, critical thinking, use of multimedia, sitting at tables instead of facing front, it all originates from him and his influence on the entire teaching profession. Um, he also famously didn't recommend any specific subjects to be required. Um, so these days we have the concept of transferable skills. So like remembering the plot overview of Romeo and Juliet is not a very transferable skill. It can transfer to West Side Story, I guess. But really transferable skills are things like critical thinking, being able to determine if a source is relevant to a research question. Um, Instead of memorizing a mathematical formula, mathematical modeling is transferable. If you're trying to build a popsicle bridge in middle school, like being able to determine what math you would need to figure out how to hold more weight. Like that's mathematical modeling, and it's more valuable than memorizing a formula out of context. And then there's social learning. This comes from the theories of Vygotsky and others. Just about everything people learn is social. Babies start by imitating their parents. As adults, we usually learn from others by reading what they wrote, by talking to people, by watching them try something and succeed or fail spectacularly. If you're watching this video, you are learning socially from me. Students see the teacher model how to do something, and they can also learn by seeing what their classmates are doing, right or wrong. Um, so the state curriculum documents in Saskatchewan and surveys of the teachers all around the province believe in all of this progressive education. They have stated goals of incorporating student interests, inquiry learning, social learning, all this stuff into their lessons. So what gives? Um, when I was on my second attempt at a master's degree, ran out of money. Okay. There was a statistic that is at the same time sad and hilarious. The 5-year turnover rate for new teachers in the US was so high that only one other US job had higher turnover. US Army Special Forces. US teaching had more attrition than Army infantry, a job about people shooting at you. And despite being shot at less, not none, but less, uh, teach, teachers had a higher turnover. Saskatchewan is no different in terms of the forces that are pressuring teachers. I found that 84% of teachers in Saskatchewan reported being the victim of violence from students at least once in their career. And 42% of teachers and 76% of teachers' assistants reported witnessing violence more than once per week. For me personally, I have been pinned up against a locker by half a class of 10th graders. I have also had to shout down a fifth grader from throwing his desk at me. He held it over his head like he was going to throw it. And I've also been punched by a seventh grader trying to break up a fight. So, in planning lessons, teachers know what's good. They believe in what's good, but they're absolutely burnt out. This leads me to the next thing, control in elementary school. So this is a subfield of education that we call classroom management. I know it sounds corporate and horrible, and that's because it is. I think for a lot of teachers, there's a kind of assumption that behavior implies that the right theory is behaviorism. So that's going to be everything from B.F. Skinner. So if you remember classical and operant conditioning, Pavlov's dogs, it's that stuff. So this subfield of education is taking its sweet time in catching up to embracing progressivist principles compared to curriculum and philosophy of education and other subfields. But it is slowly working its way through here. So when you have progressivist classroom management, that's going to look like teaching social emotional learning, often as a like preventative measure against bad behavior. It looks like students getting involved in democratically choosing class rules, or even better, you don't call it class rules, you call it class norms. Um, and when students act out, it looks like having students do reflection and working and getting them to embrace a growth mindset toward adopting more pro-social behavior. When you get kids that act out severely, it really helps to be able to, for them to sit down and talk with a caring adult to understand why the kid so that the kid can understand why they behave like that and what they can do differently in the future. So why not Saskatchewan? Why are they not doing anything like that? Well, they use a program called PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. It's a hybrid of like the behaviorism and the progressivism, but ultimately, the province has a lot of a history in giving autonomy to teachers and to schools. And the schools and teachers you seem to have had really loved and believed in authoritarian control, which, according to the data I found, like Saskatchewan students typically feel like they have a lot of freedom and a lot of choice. So your experience was not normal for your state, which is better than the Canadian average. It was not normal for Canada, which is better than the United States. And it was not normal for that time period. So I guess you just got super unlucky RNG with the school that you went to. Oops. But there's also the stuff that I mentioned before about violence. It's so common in school. So teachers just want something fast, easy, and brainless that just get the kids to obey. Discussion is not fast. Going into deep emotional issues is not easy, and it takes a lot of brain power. The schools have really terrible funding. Class sizes, so in Saskatchewan, class sizes are going over 40 in some places. They're having to use libraries as classrooms. Teacher pay is terrible. There's a significant teacher shortage. And even though teachers believe in all of these good things about behavior and curriculum, they don't have the time or manpower to implement any of it. So who's to blame? Once again, everything is politics. Look at your provincial legislature. The Saskatchewan Party has been in power since 2007, and while education funding has increased in that time in terms of real dollars, the growth is so small that it trails inflation. The NDP has been regularly complaining about this fact. They say the important figure should be dollars per student adjusted for inflation. That sounds like an improvement over the status quo to me. Um, I want to throw more shade on the Saskatchewan Party because they have been moving in a direction of requiring more core subjects and less electives, and they have been increasing standardized testing at more grade levels. Did they learn nothing from America's No Child Left Behind Act? Anyway, when you have smaller classes that are well funded and teachers have the time and money to make good lessons, a lot of the problems you mentioned disappear. I want to go on to say that people learn a lot more in school than they think. There are places in India where people graduated from fourth grade or even seventh grade, and they're unable to read a single sentence written in any language. There are villages in Africa where some high school teachers didn't graduate high school. They stopped after eighth grade. Anyone who graduated from a US or Canadian school did learn literacy and numeracy. The fact that you understand that student choice and inquiry and lifelong learning are important means that that schooling in some way managed to impart that to you. And even if you feel like it was your parents and not the school, guess what? I can almost guarantee that your parents did school for like more than 10 years of their life. And so the value was transmitted that way then. Let's talk about life after high school. So as teachers and schools, we believe that the school really needs to prepare kids for anything. We don't know what the future is going to look like, so we try to stick to those transferable skills. When I was in school, parents complained that kids weren't being taught how to balance a checkbook or write a check. See now how useful it would have been if we were taught how to write a check? Or remember when teachers used to say you wouldn't walk around with a calculator in your pocket? You suggested teaching financial literacy. Well, we have no idea what that's going to look like when kids become adults. Ideally, we teach kids problem solving, basic algebra, emotional regulation, so you're not making um, impulse buys, and then as teachers, we just have to trust the process. Or for all we know, the world will get nuked and none of the financial institutions will exist at all. But if we taught problem solving, self regulation, critical thinking, that should apply to every person in every situation. Now, for university itself, um, I feel like I was on the tail end of my specific university being worth the cost for the degree. I graduated high school in 2008. I graduated, I got my bachelor's in 2013. So had to do a super senior year from changing majors. Um, Now, degrees should be evaluated as a return on investment, just like any big expense. If you look these things up, bachelor's degrees like finance and computer science are some of the best returns on investment you can make at university. Conversely, master's degrees in nursing or education are terrible. They're even negative in ROI, but it depends. I'm currently on my third attempt at a master's degree. First two times I ran out of money, couldn't even get more loans. This time I'm doing University of the People. I'm paying out of pocket. My whole degree will be less than $5,000. And because I've been able to bring that cost down so much, it ends up being a great return on investment. When it comes to financing tertiary education, that's a whole political issue. Getting a good bachelor's degree is statistically speaking the best chance for anyone to increase their earnings. Um, Unfortunately, this isn't a problem that education can solve. It's an employer problem. So if you have two candidates for position who have demonstrated the exact same set of job skills, but one has a 4-year degree and the other has a high school diploma, then the employer is going to choose the college grad. To them, the degree serves as a proxy for a bunch of soft skills and is a way of dealing with all the unknowns about these stranger applicants. So again, yeah, that's not something that K through 12 schooling or universities can really do anything about. That's on the employers. Um, and the entry level problem is again an employer issue. If you have two applicants roughly equal in skill, in demonstrated skill, one has job experience and the other does not, the company is completely rational for hiring the one with job experience. And regarding your specific question about dropping out of college, like, is it worth it to go for 2 years and then drop out? Well, statistically, yes, college dropouts make more than those who never entered college. Um, now you don't now the increase in earnings is not half of the difference between no years of a degree and a 4-year degree. So that's kind of lame. But yes, ultimately you did benefit. And it might even have a positive ROI. Do universities care if students don't pay loans? Sort of. Legally, if 30% of students default over 3 consecutive years, they lose their eligibility for federal student aid. So that's a pretty severe penalty, but it's so rare. Um, yeah, their students couldn't take federal loans anymore. They'd have to drop out. Lots of applicants would have to bow out to go to other places. So yeah, that's really rare though. They care more about relative default rates. Universities are always comparing themselves to each other, so it's more prestigious to have lower default rates because it makes the university look like it teaches better and students get better jobs. In the macroeconomic sense, if more people feel like college is not financially worthwhile, fewer people will go to universities, and so as enrollment rates drop, some might have to close. That's kind of a tragedy of the commons problem. The big, expensive universities are probably not going to end up filling that, or if they do, it'll probably just look like closing one or more departments and not having a really big impact on the university. Most of their financials come from finance anyway. They have investments. I think it's a good idea for government money. Not just I think, but it really is a good idea for a country and for its people, for government money to be part of tertiary education in some way. Um, if you don't, then college only or mostly becomes something for rich people, which is bad. The disagreement is what is the right way for government to fund tertiary education? And tertiary can mean a lot of things. It can mean universities, community colleges, vocational schools, even GED programs, adult literacy programs, language programs for immigrants, like any adult education is tertiary. And at least in the US, there's money going around all those different kinds of programs, maybe not in such shares as everyone would like. You said that the true purpose of a system is what it actually accomplishes and the gap between its stated purpose and that is propaganda. So in Saskatchewan, it sounds like you learn perfectly what the school system is actually accomplishing. But now, after watching this video, I think you know more about the stated purpose and more importantly, who the propaganda is coming from. And it's not from school, the institution. Like schools, teachers unions, we all know what can bring schooling from its current form to its stated objectives. We know what it will take. We believe in it. We have the skills to do it. The propaganda is 100% from the people who are not funding education, the Saskatchewan Party, and what they say about education and why it's not being funded more. That's the propaganda. So I don't actually know anything about the Saskatchewan Party except what I found in this online research. So maybe it makes sense to you for them to want, quote, from you, blind obedience. People's preferences don't actually matter. People in power in their life are going to make all of their decisions for them. People do whatever they're told, unquote. Finally, several times you mentioned being made to work with people you don't like. So idealistically, students should learn how to work collaboratively with others, and get along together, stuff. Realistically, can there be any better preparation for entering the workforce than being forced to work with people you don't like? But you did ultimately learn that learning is great. So you acquired lifelong learning as a value and you practice it. It's just that the school you were in traumatized you while it was teaching you that. Learning independently is great. I wish I could do it in this phase of my life. I'm trying to become a principal, so my experience can spread from my one classroom right now to 50 classrooms. Uh, and unfortunately for me, that requires the piece of paper that says master's degree. I'm I'm a skilled educator. I'm fully capable of teaching myself how to be a good school administrator, but I have to participate in this system right now. And it's also the surest way to increase my earnings, unfortunately. So I think each person needs to gather the data and evaluate for themselves what their best option is regarding a degree or no degree, or like formal education or versus informal education. Okay, so even though I feel like I've said my piece now, the offer for collaboration is still open. Um, and to everyone else who sees this, thank you for watching. Have a great day.